Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. A long way from home. A long way from home.
Recently, I found something that most people take for granted: their history, who they are, and where they come from. I was told I had a history, but that story wasn't true. I have no photographs of myself as an infant. None of those in the hospital photographs, the ones of babies with their red and wrinkled faces. Everybody loves to say how beautiful they are, but you know what they're really thinking is, things can only get better from here. I have no photographs because when I was 1.5 years old, I was adopted. For whatever unknown reasons, I was never given a true history of my life. And I never did find out why they didn't tell me I was adopted. Were they afraid I wouldn't love them? Or that I would run away to find my natural parents? All of these fears for them were real. Who can say they were wrong?
My adoption was never a secret. The story of how my adoptive mother traveled from New Jersey to Nova Scotia and chose me from the many infants at the Ideal Maternity Home was always one of my childhood favorites. I never questioned my mother's account of my birth family. I'd been told that my birth father had been killed in the war and that my birth mother had decided to give me up for adoption. Although I sometimes thought about my birth parents and wondered what they were like and if I looked like them, I never felt the need to search for my birth mother. I was an adored only child, doted on by parents, grandparents, aunts, and uncles. As a young child, I often wished for a sibling, and always it was an older brother I wished for, and never a baby brother or sister. As I grew older, my mother and I would sometimes spend an afternoon looking at baby pictures. I loved hearing her reminisce about my first steps, first words, birthdays, and other special events. Always she would recall her trip to Nova Scotia and the first time she saw me and held me in her comforting arms. I would hear once again the story of my adoption. One day, while revisiting the photos alone, I saw a Canadian passport. Inside was a photo of an infant and 2 different names. One I knew as mine, and the other I wasn't sure of. When I asked my mother who the other name belonged to, she said it was the name my birth mother had given me at birth. I didn't realize at the time what an important bit of information that was. I simply accepted it as another part of my adoption story, and although I never saw the passport again, I never forgot that name.
Who are you now? Now that you're mine, are you something more than you were before? Are you warmer in the rain? Are you stronger for my touch? Am I giving too little by my loving you too much? How is the view, sunny and green? How do you compare it to the views you've seen? I know I am better and braver and surer too. But you, are you now? Who are you now? Are you someone better for my love?
I was born on Wednesday, June 16, 1943, at the Ideal Maternity Home in Eastchester, Nova Scotia. On May 9, 1944, my new parents came to the home looking for a baby, and they took me to their home. My mother was in her late 40s, a reluctant empty nester looking for company now that her own children had grown up. Though the Ideal Maternity Home provided her with that, she sometimes wondered about the conditions there. I do remember Mother saying that while I was there for those first 11 months that I did lay in my crib a lot in wet diapers. I guess they didn't have much help in those days at the Ideal Maternity Home.
I am one of the many babies that left the Ideal Maternity Home in Canada for the United States. I was adopted by a childless Jewish couple from Newark, New Jersey. William and Lila Young advertised heavily in that area during the 1940s. My mother, like many women, traveled to Eastchester in search of a baby. My father did not accompany her. I could never understand how a momentous decision, such as selecting a child, can be such a unilateral one. I was 4 months old when I left Nova Scotia, and 52 years would pass before I would return. Although I was told at an early age that I was adopted, the message I got that the subject was off limits. My parents only provided a few details, which I would later learn were wrong. For most of my life, the subject of my adoption was a very difficult one to discuss with my mother. She never initiated the conversation. I can't ever remember talking to my father about it. I only recently found out the reason my father severed his relationship with his mother is because she could never accept me, and she used to refer to me as a mumser, a Yiddish term meaning bastard.
By birth, I was Janice Elizabeth Dakin. By adoption, I was Janice Lynn Hubley. By marriage, I became Janice Lynn Street. How did I become who I am?
A long time ago, a Scottish lass married a Canadian soldier and settled in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. After some 26 years of marriage and no children, they decided to adopt. This was not easy, as they were then 45 and 56 respectively, but after some looking, they found that the Ideal Maternity Home in Chester, Nova Scotia did not find age a discriminatory factor. When visiting the home, they were actually wanting to adopt twin boys. As my father walked around the room, he looked for those twin boys. He happened to look down at a baby in a particular crib. This baby looked up, smiled, and raised up her arms. He reached in, picked up the baby, and announced, "We'll take this one." That was truly my lucky day and the start of a happy and a loving life.
Auf Flügen des Gesanges, Herzliebchen, trag ich dich fort, fort nach den Fluren des Ganges, dort weiß ich den schönsten Ort. Da liegt ein rotblühenden Garten im stillen Mondenschein. Die Lotusblumen erwarten ihr traute Schwesterlein. Die Lotusblumen erwarten ihr traute Schwesterlein. Dort wollen wir niedersinken unter den Palmenbaum und Lieb und Ruhe trinken und träumen seligen Traum und träumen seligen Traum. Seligen Traum.
I was born at the Ideal Maternity Home on February 1st, 1943. I was almost 2 years old when I was taken home by my new parents. My mother always loved to tell me about the day that she and my father went to the Ideal Maternity Home. It was January 12th, 1945, and they were going there with the intention of adopting a baby girl. They made the trip by taxi and arrived around noon. They were met by Mr. Young, who apologized for his wife Lila, who was ill and unable to greet them. Mr. Young then took them to the front office where they were to fill out some papers. After that, he took them to a room where they saw little boys playing, and they counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And when they entered the room, 8 boys ran to them. I got there first. And I held on to the woman who would become my mother. Then Mr. Young took Mother and Dad to see 85 other children. But Mother decided not to look at the other babies. They told Mr. Young that they had decided to take me, the 2-year-old. I was always aware of being an adopted child from an early age, and always knew my birth mother, who she was, and where to find her. Even knowing this, I never had the desire to contact my birth mother, for I was more than satisfied with my adoptive parents, my parents.
I am a survivor of the Ideal Maternity Home. I was born March 20th, 1941. I was 6 months old when my parents came to the home and chose me. I always knew that I had been adopted, and most of the time it never really bothered me, except when I was extremely unhappy or when someone called me a bastard. When that happened, I wanted my real mom. I really hated being called a bastard.
Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Nobody knows but Jesus. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Glory, hallelujah. Sometimes I'm up, sometimes I'm down. Oh, yes, Lord. Sometimes I'm almost to the ground. Oh, yes, Lord. Nobody Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Nobody knows but Jesus. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Glory, hallelujah.
I was born Robert Vennell on June 22, 1945, and was adopted by a wonderful couple. They were the best mom and dad a kid could ever want. Our family life focused around each other. We were happy, and our home was full of love. Memories of my early years are very scattered. I was brought up in the city of Halifax, which in the late 1940s was very much like the rural areas of the province today. I can remember my parents keeping chickens and geese, and of building our first house, which we moved into when I was 5 years old. Life was so simple then.
My dad was a wonderful person. He was in the Merchant Marine, so we didn't see him very much, but it was always a joyful time when we did. He loved me dearly, and I'll always be grateful to him. My mother is another story. She already had a son of her own who was 5 years older than me. She also had a younger adopted daughter. She wasn't an ideal parent, and most of the time we had to do for ourselves. The rest is just too ugly to think about. It always makes me sad to think that I can't really love her. She's an ill-tempered, vulgar person. Despite everything that happened during those years, I thank her from the bottom of my heart that she at least rescued me from the Ideal Maternity Home. If she hadn't, I'm almost sure I would not be here today.
It seemed that there was always someone to play with, and during those years I was never aware of any sense of loneliness associated with being an only child. We had a lot of family contact in those days, and all special occasions were family occasions.
We lived our little drama. We kissed in a field of white, and stars fell on Alabama last night. I can't forget the glamour. Your eyes held a tender light, and stars fell on Alabama last night. I never planned in my imagination a situation so heavenly, a fairyland where no one else could enter, and in the center, just you and me, dear. My heart beat like a hammer, my arms wound around you tight, and stars fell on Alabama last night.
I was born at the Ideal Maternity Home in East Chester, Nova Scotia on February the 9th, 1941. I remained there until 7 months later, when I was rescued by my mother, when she came to the home to accompany her best friend who was going to adopt a child from there. Now, my mother had never actually discussed adoption, though my father did say to her as she left for the day, "Don't do anything foolish." While she was waiting for her friend to complete the formalities, Mum wandered round the place, looking at all the other babies. When she came to my cot, I reached out to her and she picked me up, fell in love with me, took me home that very same day, and for the last 57 years, her love for me has always been there. Apparently, once on the road back to Miragamish, she started to panic. But strengthened by the other woman who came on the trip, she regained her courage. When she arrived home and walked into the house, Dad looked at her with me in her arms and said, "What have you got there?" She said, "It's a little boy," to which he replied, "What a little darling." So he opened his arms, wrapped me in them, and I was home. They soon began adoption proceedings, and I was to grow up as part of the Murdoch family. There was my sister Bonnie, their own child, and all the close-knit Murdoch family clan, consisting of my father's brothers, sisters, and their many children. I never once felt that I didn't belong. Because of all their love, I am the person that I am today. Years later, when my son Andrew was born with Down syndrome, I had an opportunity to relive this same acceptance and unconditional love that I had received from my mother and my father and the whole Murdoch family. Andrew was born in London, England, and when he was 6 months old, he only weighed 10 pounds. It was not clear at this point whether he would survive, so we decided to take Andrew to Nova Scotia to visit his grandparents. When my father saw him at the airport for the first time, he simply said, "Well, there's not much to him, is there?" So he picked him up, held him close, and Andrew was also home. For the 3 weeks we stayed in Nova Scotia, Andrew spent most of his time lying on my father's chest, held there securely by his strong and tender hands. He sang to Andrew, he talked to him, he played with him, and when we went back to London, Andrew started to gain real weight for the first time since he was born. It was now pretty clear that Andrew decided to stay, and he is today a very healthy, able, strong, fit, loving young man of 22, a young man of whom I am justifiably proud. It's true what they say about the circle of love. It does go round. It does make miracles happen, and it goes round over and over and over again. It was my mother who encouraged me to follow my love of music. It was my mother who sang to me, and who, when she sang to me, made me feel so loved and so special. Was it a bad beginning, my beginning? Yes, it was. But what a wonderful journey since then.
Oh, thank me not for songs I sing you. Rather should I give thanks to you. They are your own. I am but proving the beauty that you gave to me. Yours, they are yours, the songs we treasure. In your dear eyes I saw them shine. Yours is their beauty, yours their measure. 'Tis but your gift that makes them mine. 'Tis but your gift that makes them mine.
I think my adoptive parents might have been unique in that they not only adopted me, but they adopted 3 babies from the place ironically called the Ideal Maternity Home. Thanks to my adoptive parents, I grew up with a big sister and a younger brother. We were a family in the truest sense. Mom was intelligent, hardworking, talented, and was full of love for us. She had a sense of humor, a sense of style, and instilled in us a high sense of values. We not only received her warmth, but her capacity to show love. We are her children. I truly believe that if she had known everything that is alleged to have gone on at that maternity home, it would have broken her heart. I believe she did not know.
Up until I was 9 years old, I had never thought of where I was born, or even dreamed that the mother and father who had raised and loved me up until that time were not my real parents. Things were about to change. My bedroom was just off Mom and Dad's, and one night I woke up to the sound of my father calling out in pain. I could hear my mother talking with him and crying. A little later, Mom went and called the doctor. I didn't know what was happening, and I was too afraid to come out of my room to find out. Shortly after my mother made the phone call, I heard the sound of an ambulance, and I soon realized that it was stopping at our house. All of a sudden, everything went quiet. And I waited for some time before I eventually came out of my room. Neither Mom or Dad were there, and the bedclothes from my parents' bed were scattered over the bed and on the floor. I knew that my dad had been sick before, but nothing like this. It was less than an hour later that Mom came home. She was crying. My dad had died of a cerebral hemorrhage.
Just as my parents were settling into parenthood, I became ill. I had a bad rash on my entire body. The scabs were so bad they had to shave all my hair off. The doctor put me in hospital and tried to find out what was wrong. When my parents told the Youngs about my being ill, the Youngs said that my parents could take me back to the home if my parents wanted to, but they wouldn't hear of it. Can you imagine? It was like implying I was a defective product and could be taken back to the store under some sort of satisfaction guaranteed or your money cheerfully refunded policy. To ensure I wouldn't scratch, I was tied to my crib. After several days, I was still failing, and much against the doctor's wishes, my dad came to the hospital and announced he was taking me home. He stopped by the local pharmacy and mentioned my problems to the pharmacist. The pharmacist suggested to Father that he only feed me with a certain powdered milk, as his own child had this similar problem, and it had helped. So Dad bought the powdered milk and came home and made me up a bottle. After downing the second bottle of milk, my mom told my dad he was going to kill me. But Dad said, well, if that was the case, at least she was going to die with a full stomach. The milk worked, and my eczema cleared. In September of 1941, the final adoption went through.
Dad was very proud of us, his children. He worked hard to provide for us and loved to show us off. I will never know why he decided to show me my adoption papers when I was 17, but he did. Together with information dropped now and then by Mom, I was able, years later, to track down my birth parentage. Even so, when I found my birth mother, I made the choice not to tell Mom. I never wanted her to doubt my love for her, never wanted her to wonder whose daughter I was, who my real mother was. She was my real mother. She was the right mother for me. I am as much like her as any birth child could be.
My story began in the summer of 1996 when I went to Boston to meet my birth sister for the first time. We look a lot alike and have the same mannerisms, likes, and dislikes. My birth sister had found our mother and several aunts, but my birth sister had also agreed not to tell our mother who we were. If I was to meet my birth mother, it was to be under the same conditions, in a non-threatening atmosphere, in a neutral atmosphere, in a church. My birth sister and I don't have a personal one-on-one relationship with my mother, as she wants to put her teenage years behind us, behind her. This is not really against us. This is the way she thinks. This is the way she is. She rejects members of her own family who have had children out of wedlock. My adoptive mother, that's another story, much more pleasant. I was told that while my adoptive mother waited in a chair at the Ideal Maternity Home for Mrs. Young to go and get a child, that I apparently crawled up on her lap and grabbed her pearl beads and broke them, causing the pearls to roll all over the floor. My grandmother told me that my mother did not have to choose a child, as I had chosen her. She said it was the Lord's will. And although Mother had gone to adopt a girl, she came home with me. I must say that she certainly loved and cared for me over the years, and that she turned 90 the year the survivors gathered in Nova Scotia for a reunion.
Yiddish was the second language in our home. My maternal grandmother, a truly wonderful woman, who immigrated from Russia, spoke both Yiddish and English. The adults used Yiddish in the house when they didn't want me to understand. Although I was raised by Jewish parents in a Jewish neighborhood, I never attended a synagogue or was ever forced to go to Hebrew school. I attributed that fact to my parents' limited resources and their inability to pay for the tuition. Nevertheless, it was still understood that I was to have Jewish friends and, of course, eventually, a Jewish husband. It wasn't until my first son, Stephen, made his bar mitzvah that I truly understood why I was never sent to a Hebrew school. Following his bar mitzvah, my mother thanked me for having the party, because as she put it, I didn't have to. That's when I realized she never considered me Jewish. According to Talmudic law, a Jew is one who's born to a Jewish mother. If the mother isn't Jewish, neither is the child. That's why I was never given any religious training. Perhaps she knew that at my birth I was baptized, a fact that I just recently found out. It's no wonder I felt isolated and uncomfortable. It's no wonder I'd gravitated toward Christian friends.
Our parents always told us that we were special because they had picked us out from all the other babies. The first time they went to the home to pick out a boy, they chose my sister. The second time they went to the home to pick out a boy, they took me home. The third time they went to the home to pick out a boy, we all went together and came home with a boy, my brother. I wonder who did the real choosing.
On September 29, 1945, my new parents legally adopted me, making me their child and changing my name. Mother told me that she had picked me out of a gaggle of babies, almost like picking a puppy out of a pet store window. Mother used to say to me that I was the cutest baby there, and that's why she picked me. Shortly after the adoption, they found that I had both a hearing and speech problem. Not having a lot of money, it wasn't until 1972 that I was able to get hearing aids, which I now wear in both ears.
Life as I had known it had drastically changed. My mom was now a widow and a single mother with a 9-year-old child. Shortly after my father passed away, my mom called me into the kitchen and told me that there was something that she had to tell me. After reassurances that she loved me, she proceeded to tell me that I had been adopted. At that time, the news didn't have any great impact on me. She and Dad had been the only parents that I had ever known, and as far as I was concerned, she was my mother. The adoption papers didn't mean anything to me, not at 9 years of age. But I did remember one thing, my birth mother's name, Violet Venel. After telling me all this, she took the papers and put them in the stove, saying that we didn't need them anymore. Little did she realize that the day would come that I would not only need them, but want them. I am sure that in her heart, she felt that she was doing the right thing. Those papers were a reminder that someone else had given birth to me. Right up until the time she died, my mom was terrified that my birth mother would come back into the picture and take me away. She was afraid she would lose me. Even as an adult, when I found my birth mother, the fear was still there. Mom was so intimidated by her very existence.
Ô fraîche nuit, nuit transparente, mystère sans obscurité. La vie est noire et dévorante, ô fraîche nuit, nuit transparente, donnez-moi ta placidité. Ô belle nuit, nuit étoilée, vers moi tes regards sans baiser. Éclaire mon âme troublée, ô belle nuit, nuit tralala, mets ton sourire en mes pensées. Ô sainte nuit, nuit taciturne, pleine de paix et de douceur, mon cœur bouillonne comme une urne. Ô sainte nuit, nuit taciturne, fais le silence dans mon cœur. Ô grande nuit, nuit solennelle, en qui tout est délicieux, prends mon être entier sous ton aile. Ô grande nuit, nuit solennelle, verse le sommeil en mes yeux.
The Second World War was a time when life was difficult for most people. Concerns about rumors of babies being sold on the black market in the USA from a remote rural orphanage in Nova Scotia were of little concern to anyone. Everyone was far too busy keeping the boys overseas well supplied and keeping the home fires burning. But the rumors persisted, and the government of the day finally assigned an investigating team to visit the Ideal Maternity Home. This team was to see if there was any proof at all attached to the persistent rumors of the illegal sale of babies from the home. One member of that team was a man named Sinclair Randall, and as a result of being on that very team, he was to meet me and to become my father. My father said he entered a room filled on both sides with cribs, and down the middle were 2 more rows of cribs, back to back, each containing a child to be adopted. He walked up and down the rows, looking at each child, until he reached my crib. It would appear that I must have liked his look, because Dad said that when he reached the crib containing me, I was standing at the foot of my crib, arms outstretched. While involved in the investigation at the home, Dad inadvertently came across my file. He knew he was not supposed to have access to such information, but naturally he couldn't resist reading it. He got caught by an official from the home, and the file was taken from him, never to be seen again. During his brief glance, however, he discovered the name of my birth mother and the name and location of her father, information that would later prove quite valuable indeed.
In 1977, after pondering for many years, I finally decided to pursue my search. I began by obtaining a copy of the Halifax-Dartmouth telephone book. I then proceeded to type letters with every person with the same last name as my birth mother. My husband was an attorney, and I used his legal stationery that listed our home address. I figured that this would make the letters look more official. Also, I felt that maybe my birth mother might think she was a beneficiary of an inheritance. I became obsessed with the search. Fortunately, it only took about 70 letters before I hit pay dirt. One day, the phone rang. I answered, and the woman on the other end said she was looking for the lawyer. Well, I knew immediately to whom I was speaking. But somehow I managed to stay calm, and I pretended that I was my husband's legal secretary. And I told her that the lawyer isn't in right now, but if you want to leave your name and number, he'll get back to you as soon as possible. I drove right over to my husband's law office and confessed my recent activities. He promptly called the woman and announced that he was representing a client who was an adoptee looking for her birth mother. She confirmed that she had given up a baby for adoption in 1945. She replied to 2 follow-up letters in a businesslike manner, and after a few months had passed, I got up the nerve to call her and introduce myself, not as the attorney's wife, but as her daughter.
When I was 15 years old, we moved to Montreal. When I was older, I began to make inquiries about my birth parents. These were always met with silence. It was all hush-hush. People wouldn't talk about it. I wrote to the Provincial Department of Community Services, but was given little information. The provincial office told me that my mother was from Digby County and that all the records had been destroyed in a fire years ago. So I went on with my life.
When I was around 3 years of age, we moved to a small community in New Brunswick where Dad cleared land and built our home. From the time I first started to walk, I had problems. I had a limp, and when this was checked out by the doctor, he said there was nothing wrong. Before I started school, my parents told me that I had been adopted, but it really didn't sink in. They said I was special because I was chosen, and that was all right with me.
In 1996, I decided to have the name listed on my Nova Scotia birth certificate officially changed to that of my adoptive parents. Imagine my horror when I was told that the Department of Community Services had no record that I had ever been legally adopted. They couldn't find the papers.
De sa danse soudaine et vorace, comme un chien l'amour m'a mordu. En suivant mon sang répandu, va, tu pourras suivre ma trace. suis mon chemin dur, fondrière au sentier perdu. Si la course ne t'arrache, en passant par où j'ai passé, tu verras que seul et blessé, j'ai parcouru ce triste monde. Et qu'ainsi je m'en fus mourir, bien loin, sans découvrir le bleu manoir de Rosemonde.
It wasn't until after I got married that I would again think about trying to find out more about my family. Around 1968, I contacted the Department of Social Services explaining what I knew of my birth situation and providing my mother's name, which I had still remembered. How naive I was. I thought that all it would take would be a telephone call, and with the information that I had, I would receive the information that I wanted. My response was the same as many others before me. I'm sorry, but we cannot provide any identifying information. By the time that I thought of trying to contact the Ideal Maternity Home, I was told that the home had already burned, together with all of its records.
I grew up near Chester, Nova Scotia. It was a pretty setting, and I remember the evening sunsets, the moon shining on the water at night, and of course the piles of snow in the winter. We lived on a large farm with big gardens. We had a couple of cows, horses, 3 pigs, hens, chickens, a dog, and about 30 cats.
It wasn't until some other child said I was different that I went to my mom. She told me they couldn't have a baby of their own, and so they had chosen one that was born to someone who was unable to care for it. Then it made sense why I was different, and I went on with my life.
Our phone conversation, as I remember it, was almost surreal. It certainly did not unfold as I expected or hoped for, particularly since I was her sole surviving child. Her attitude was definitely not what I would call motherly. She begged me not to inform her family of my existence, because, as she put it, she had a deep secret buried within her all these years, and she didn't wish to reveal it at this stage in her life. Now, although I believe that she's deprived me of the right of knowing that part of my family, I have honored that request to this day. What was even more upsetting was the fact that she had told me that I had an older brother and that she had kept him. Unfortunately, he died at the age of 6, about 3 years after she relinquished me. She had asked for photographs of my children, but at that point, I couldn't swallow the hurt and disappointment. I became very vindictive, and I decided that she wasn't entitled to anything to do with my children, and if she didn't want them, if she didn't want me, then she couldn't have them. We were a package deal. I had a lot of anger to work out. I became embittered and retreated. She became filled with guilt and also retreated. She had moved away and left no forwarding address.
In 1993, that office told me that my mother was from Digby County and that all the records had been destroyed in a fire years before. In 1996, that same office was telling me that they were not sure I was adopted. Surely they must have known in 1993 that their own records showed that I had not been legally adopted. Why didn't they tell me then?
Because of my speech problems, I didn't start school until I was 8 years old. Growing up, I spent most of my time alone. The rest of my parents' children were all older than I. My parents were very good to me and gave me what they could. My dad was born in 1877 and was an old man when he and Mother adopted me. Dad and I were very close. We would go out in the boat and row around the cove, feed the animals, and even at that young age, I would help Dad to make hay. Dad got sick in the summer of 1955 and was diagnosed with cancer. As time passed, he continued to weaken, and by November, the only nourishment he could take was what we were feeding him on a spoon. Finally, on January 30th, 1956, with Mother and me sitting beside him, he passed away. I really miss Dad.
Und morgen wird die Sonne wieder scheinen und auf dem Wege, den ich gehen werden, wird uns die Glücklichen sie inmitten dieser sonnenatmenden Erden. Und zu dem Strand, dem weiten, wogenblauen, werden wir still und langsam
After meeting me, Mother agreed with Father, and the decision was made to apply to adopt me. The application was processed, and one night, while Father was en route to Halifax from the South Shore, he stopped at the home to pick me up. I was released from the Ideal Maternity Home at 11 months of age, with a little more on me than diapers and an undershirt. Father said he stopped at a store in East Chester and purchased some home-knit clothing for me to wear on the 3-hour journey to Halifax. He picked up a sailor hitchhiking back to his ship. The sailor was assigned the task of holding me for the journey. I had been lucky. I had been adopted. I had a family, and I was home. Only years later would it be learned that many babies never did get that privilege, and those who did not would become known as butterbox babies, after the boxes used for their coffins. Father led me to believe that the province of Nova Scotia paid a support subsidy on babies up to a year old, and that at the Ideal Maternity Home, after that subsidy was dropped, it was frequently the case that the baby disappeared. This was apparently the source of the rumors that had created the investigation at the home in the first place. Since I was 11 months old at the time of my adoption, I think perhaps I was very lucky indeed.
In January 1997, I received another letter from Community Services and was given more information about my birth mother, information that I should have been entitled to years ago. They also gave me the address of Parent Finders, Nova Scotia.
When I was around 14 years old, the doctors finally admitted that I had a problem. As it turned out, both hips had been dislocated at birth. One leg was shorter than the other, and that was what was causing the pain and the limp. This had never been discovered by either the doctor who checked me out before my adoption or the Youngs when I was born. By the time I was 18, I had the first stages of arthritis.
I contacted the Department of Social Services again several times, begging for information. If ever a person feels the need to humble themselves, well, this is indeed the way to do it. Failing any help or compassion from this route, I thought that if nothing else, maybe I could find other families with the Venel surname. I contacted Parent Finders and proceeded to begin a search with their help. On my own, I decided to spend some time at the Maritime Tell and Tell, and there I began to peruse telephone directories from the East Coast to the West Coast. There was one Venel in the Halifax directory, and I contacted them, but they didn't have any information that could help. In the interim, I continued to phone the Department of Community Services and continued to beg and plead for information. This time, I received a bit more information. In addition to saying that they could provide no identifying information, they did tell me that my mother used Mrs. with her name and that she had listed Cobourg, Ontario as her place of residence. Armed with this information, I continued to go through the Ontario directories, found the town of Cobourg, and there among the V's was a V. Venel. This seemed more than a coincidence to me, so I decided to immediately write to this person. Within a week, I received a letter from Violet Venel telling me that my search was over. The letter was full of guilt and pleadings not to communicate with her, any of her family, or she would deny everything, and I wouldn't hear from her again.
When my father had accidentally come across and read my file, he discovered my birth mother's name and that her father was a retired Charlottetown policeman. He found no mention as to the identity of my birth father, and I now suspect I'll never know who he was. So I always knew I was adopted. I always knew the name of my birth mother, and that she was from Prince Edward Island. I always thought of myself as chosen, as opposed to my parents having to take what they got. When I was 4 or 5 years old, Father and Mother took me to Prince Edward Island. Father went to where my birth grandfather had worked, and using some excuse, maybe asking directions, made contact with him. I have a childhood memory, which I'm not sure about, whether it's real or imagined, but I do have this memory of playing on a big man's knee on the veranda of a building with big white columns. Although my parents knew who this man was, they didn't tell him who I was. And now Mother often wonders if they should have told him that I was his grandson. Well, it's too late now.
Parent Finders phoned on February 5th, acknowledging receipt of my letter, and the lady on the other end of the phone proceeded to tell me that she was sure that she had found my birth mother. There are no words that could describe that moment. Feelings just suddenly surfaced that I never knew existed, and I mean such tremendously good feelings. I was on cloud 9. Parent Finders gave me all the information they had, including a phone number.
Dans ton cœur dort un clair de lune, un doux clair de lune d'été. Et pour fuir la vie importune, je me noierai dans ta clarté. J'oublierai les douleurs passées, mon amour, quand tu berceras mon triste cœur et mes pensées dans le calme aimant de tes bras. Tu prendras ma tête malade, oh, quelquefois sur tes genoux, et lui diras une ballade. Une ballade qui semblera parler de nous, et dans tes yeux pleins de tristesse, dans tes yeux alors je boirai tant de baisers et de tendresse que peut-être je guérirai.
The older children looked after the farm as Mother couldn't afford to do so. By that time, the animals were all gone, and with only a small pension, Mother couldn't really manage the farm. Shortly after, she got sick and the farm was eventually sold. For a short period of time, she lived with me and my late husband in Bridgewater. She had been diagnosed with cancer in 1954, and on April 26, 1981, she passed away.
With great anxiety, nervousness, and excitement, I mustered up the courage to phone this lady. At first, she denied ever having any children, and I was so disappointed.
I was about 10 or 11 years old when I found out that I was adopted. I was told by the Reverend, and boy was I upset. I immediately went home and asked Mother if it was true. She wanted to know who told me, and when I said the Reverend, she then admitted it. I mean, if you can't believe a Reverend, who can you believe?
I phoned my birth mother for a second time, and we both agreed that we would at least write to each other. She needed time to take it in all as well.
I was never aware of the scandal surrounding the Ideal Maternity Home until I was in my early teens. To those of us living in Chester, the home was just another place, like the grocery store or the flower shop. Everyone knew the building was there, but no one really paid a lot of attention to what was going on. We were involved in our own lives, and there was no reason to suspect that anything out of the ordinary was going on in the maternity home. It had been an established business, a part of the community since 1928. I really believe that most people just took the place for granted. There wasn't a lot of talk about what supposedly went on there. The selling of babies, of people letting babies die.
Once the contact was made with Violet, the next hurdle that I had to cross was how was I going to tell my mom. I knew that I had to tell her, regardless of how she would feel about it. If I didn't and it slipped out sometime, that would really hurt her. I didn't know what I was going to say, even up until I opened my mouth to speak. I'm not sure how I started, but I'm pretty sure that I assured her that I didn't want to upset her, but had to tell her something. As I told my story, I watched the huge tears building up in her eyes until they just burst out. Just the sight of them and knowing that she was hurting made me hurt very much. After the initial shock, I assured her that it took a lot more than the act of birth to make a mother, and that I would only have one real mother, and that was her. She was the one who brought me home, loved and cared for me all these years. She was my mother and could never be replaced. That day was a pretty special day for us, especially to be sharing the feelings that we were both feeling. We, like most families, never made it a habit of telling each other how we really felt. I had no doubt by the time I left that she knew just how special and how loved she was. I also knew how threatened and intimidated that she felt now that I had found Violet. Unfortunately, I couldn't change that, and I could only assure her of my love and that she would never be replaced.
Songs my mother taught me in the days long vanished, seldom from her eyelids were the teardrops banished. Now I teach my children each melodious measure. Oft the tears are flowing, oft they flow from my memory's treasure.
When I was 13 years old, after the home had been closed down by the government, it was reopened again as a hotel, and I went to work for the Youngs. I waited tables and worked in the kitchen and made beds. They were really nice people to work for. Mrs. Young was very strict, but Mr. Young, he did whatever she told him to. When I was working upstairs making beds, I would slip away whenever I could and go up to the annex. That was one of the dome rooms, about 8 feet by 10 feet. And in that room, there were hundreds and hundreds of files in rows of filing cabinets and full boxes piled 2 and 3 feet high. Besides the cabinets and the boxes, Files were scattered and overflowing on the floor. Every chance I'd get, I'd go up to the annex and look through those files, looking and hoping that I'd find the one with my name on it. But I never did. I often think, if only we had all those files now.
My birth mother and I maintained an active correspondence for the next several years until her death. From the beginning, she told me that she would tell me who my father was, but it was almost 4 years before she finally did. We never really formed a relationship, and I had no desire to actually meet with her. She did play a part in my life, and I did look forward to hearing from her, but I never knew what to expect when I did get a letter. One letter would be so nice and thoughtful, and then the next one would be bitter and full of mean things. Despite that, even that kind of contact was better than none at all. It was pretty clear that the shame of my birth was not forgotten, nor was allowed to be forgotten or forgiven by her husband. And she didn't have the faith or security in her family to share the story of my birth. When she decided to leave my birth father and marry her present husband, he knew before they were married that she was pregnant, and he married her anyway. I held to my promise not to contact any of my sisters, but as luck would have it, one of my sisters, Penny, was visiting Violet at the time my letter arrived, and sensing something was wrong, she managed to copy most of my return address. My sisters Penny and Debbie had suspected that they had a brother somewhere. They repeatedly overheard arguments as they were growing up about the baby and he, referring to the baby. Penny eventually contacted me, and after a lot of riddles, introduced herself as my sister. It was so strange to finally be talking with someone that was actually part of me. The following week, she and her family arrived at my home, and for the first time, other than my own children, I had the opportunity to meet my first blood relative.
I wasn't really aware of the Butterbox baby stories until the fall of 1988. When reading the paper, I saw my picture in the photo that was taken at the Ideal Maternity Home in the 1940s. I was shocked to see the photo and find out about the story. I contacted Betty Cahill, the author of the book, The Butterbox Babies, and then reporters came to my home to interview me. From that time, the story has been continuing with the coming forward of more and more people who were connected with the home, with the hearing of new stories and experiences, and being part of the ongoing quest to find out the truth. I don't know who my birth parents are. I continue to search and continue to hope that one day I will find some of my birth family and have the chance to share in their lives and they in mine.
I did get to meet my birth mother and spent 4 marvelous hours with her. I simply cannot describe in words what a feeling that was. My birth mother is not in good health, and she felt that she wasn't able to share our story with her own family, and so it stayed confidential. She was unfortunately riddled with guilt. Still, I love her dearly, and I didn't want to do anything that would hurt her or change her life. I felt that I must respect her wishes, but deep down, I would have loved to have had her near me and make up for lost time, as her time is getting shorter every day. She's a fantastic person. We plan to keep in touch, and I only wish that I had been able to find her 10 years ago when she was healthier.
I had never really thought a lot about searching for my birth family. My birth certificate showed that I was delivered by Lila Young, and up until a few years ago, I didn't think too much of the home or the name. A story on the 11 o'clock news, however, caught my interest. They were talking about a Lila Young and her home for unwed mothers in East Chester, where they had found butter boxes with young babies' bodies buried in them. I immediately got up and looked through my adoption papers.
During that rather disappointing telephone conversation, my birth mother did provide me with some information and a name of my birth father. And so once again, I started writing. And after about 20 or 30 letters, I found him. He was 95 years old, and I was 32. He acknowledged knowing my mother and reported that he had been her employer years before. He stated that she had 2 children, one being a little boy that died. That's when I knew that he knew about me. Unfortunately, he denied being my father. And because of that denial, I decided not to pursue any further investigations. In 1977, 20 years has passed since my initial contact with my birth mother. And I decided that if I was ever going to meet her, I better act soon. I no longer knew where she lived or if she was even alive. So again, I started writing. I sent out letters that stated that I was an old friend who had lost contact. My search was successful. She had telephoned me about 3 years ago, and we had met for the first and probably the last time. She acknowledged that the meeting for her was very uneasy because I looked like the man who denied being my father. Nevertheless, it was a pleasant meeting. Although she opened up a bit, I felt no real warmth. One of her puzzling questions was, "How old are you?" I would have thought that the date of my birth would have been etched in her memory forever. But that was followed by an even stranger statement. "I didn't know you were born in Canada." Well, I said, "Don't you remember? You were there."
Our visit went extremely well. It is hard to describe the feeling and emotions of that first meeting with my sister. There was an instant sense of knowing. There was no strangeness. It was as if we had known each other all of our lives. We were family.
Since all this has began, I have met approximately 25 other New Jersey residents who were born at the Idow Maternity Home. For the first time, I have people to talk to who understand my emotions, my issues, frustrations, and my need to know my deep roots. The bond that we have is incredible because we have all walked the same miles in the similar shoes. When I made plans to return to Nova Scotia for the Idow Maternity Home reunion last summer, I decided to reopen the search for my paternal relatives. I located my father's obituary and contacted the cemetery caretaker where he is buried and asked for the names of his next of kin. They provided me with the name of a paternal cousin in Tatamagouche, Nova Scotia. They confirmed that they knew my mother and they were aware of the pregnancy. At last, I have found my father's family. Unfortunately, in my hesitation, it resulted in locating my family only after another brother and a sister had passed away.
Next, there was a book written by Betty Cahill and the TV movie. My emotions were up and down as I watched it, and some of the things my parents told me about my adoption began to ring true. They did speak of a room full of babies. As the years went by, I began to think of my birth mom more and more, and I wondered how her life had been. Was she happy? Did I have any half-brothers or sisters? There was no way I wanted to disrupt her life, but I wondered if she thought about me and what my life had been like. I was certainly fortunate to have been brought up by such a loving and caring family. I was an only child, and I had often missed having siblings. I have also wondered about my heritage and what I can pass on to my children. I was certainly the lucky one coming out of the Idow Maternity Home, and my heart aches for the ones who didn't. It could have been me in one of those boxes.
Them that's got shall get, them that's not shall lose. So the Bible says, and it still is news. Mama may have, Papa may have, but God bless the child that's got his own. That's got his own. Yes, the strong gets more while the weak ones fade. Empty pockets don't ever make the grade. Mama may have, Papa may have, but God bless the child that's got his own, that's got his own. Money, you got lots of friends crowding round the door. When they're gone and spending ends, they don't come no more. Rich relations give crusts of bread and such. You can help yourself, but don't take too much. Mama may have, Papa may have, but God bless the child that's got his own, that's got his own.
There is one point I would like to make. The day parent finders told me that they had found my mother, I was on cloud 9, ecstatic, full of great expectations. At last now I could put a face to her, kiss her, hug her, touch her. This news was so important, I wanted to tell the whole world. Then once you have been reunited and you realize that your biological mother wants none of this, your expectations come crashing down. I thought I was prepared for anything, but we're none of us prepared for rejection. Thinking about it from my mother's point of view, I realized that in an instant, I had changed her life forever. I am sure she had buried the past deep within her. I came along and I changed all that, and all of her past was now out of her hiding place. I am the living secret that she wanted to remain hidden. Maybe with time, her coat of armor will soften. I wish I knew her thoughts. I know she is suffering terribly, mentally and morally, and I feel very guilty about this. Should I go, or should I stay away?
After being given the names and possible cities in which to find my birth mum, I found a possible match in Toronto. There was a very good chance that this woman was she. So with phone number in hand, I had to find a way to make the call. Would there be denial or acceptance? So many questions and only one way to get the answer. I decided that I would call at 6:45 on Wednesday, April the 16th. When the voice at the other end answered, I said my name was Brenda and that I was calling from British Columbia on a personal matter. I told her I was researching my family history and that I had been adopted. I told her I had reason to believe that she could be my birth mum. I gave her my name, the date of my birth, and where I was born. There was a silence, and then she said that yes, I was indeed her daughter. We talked for almost an hour, but she told me that her husband was not my birth father. She said my birth father worked at a local theater, and when she told him he was pregnant, he told her he was married. She sounded so warm and loving. She said she had often thought about me and had hoped I had a good life. She is now 78 years old, and I really hope to be meeting her sometime soon.
Kiss today goodbye, the sweetness and the sorrow. Wish me luck the same to you, but I can't regret what I did for love, what I did for love. Look, my eyes are dry. The gift was ours to borrow. It's as if we always knew. And I won't forget what I did for love, what I did for love. Gone, love is never gone. As we travel on, love's what we'll remember. Kiss today goodbye and point me toward tomorrow. We did what we had to do. Won't forget, can't regret what I did for love.
16th, I have received mail from Toronto. It was a small envelope and not very thick, and I knew before I opened it that it would be disappointing. On a small piece of white paper, she wrote, "Received your letter. Sorry to inform you that I have no interest in setting up a relationship with you. Sorry to disappoint you, but this is the way I feel. Please do not attempt to contact me further." This certainly didn't sound like the woman that I spoke with on the phone.
My birth mother did tell me that 10 years ago she would have had the strength to deal with this, but she is now very frail. The government should have shared that information with me years ago. What a loss for me and my birth mother. I guess I am very lucky that it was not too late, but time is running out.
I have been blessed with 3 wonderful children. I've had a good life, and have recognized that I was indeed fortunate to have been chosen from the many babies at the Isle du Maternity Home. Every morning when I look at the Le Havre Creamery butter box that I found in a Nova Scotia antique shop last summer, I realize what might have been. I think about the many babies that did not survive, and I am reminded of my blessings. I will always be thankful that my birth mother chose adoption over abortion. I'm extremely indebted to my adoptive parents and to my maternal grandmother for nurturing and loving me and providing me with a good sense of values and a fine education. Also, I'm very appreciative of the opportunity to meet my birth family members, and I'm hopeful of maintaining lifelong relationships. I only wish I could share this joy with my adoptive mother. But I don't think she would understand that having feelings for one part of my family does not negate the feelings I have for another part of my family. You see, I am a mosaic, and the pieces that they all contributed has made me what I am and who I am today. I guess adoption makes one quite introspective. I have learned a great deal about myself during this journey. It's been an emotional roller coaster, but also a very liberating experience. Feelings that I have repressed for years have finally been validated by other adoptees. In addition, I've also begun to address the demons that plague both my birth mother and my adoptive parents. I'm still absorbing the impact of all that has transpired. And I know that I have become a more complete person, and I'm delighted I ventured down this path.
To dream the impossible dream, to fight the unbeatable foe, to bear with unbearable sorrow, to run where the brave dare not go, to right the unrightable wrong, to love pure and chaste from afar, to try when your arms are too weary, to reach the unreachable star. This is my quest, to follow that star, no matter how hopeless, no matter how far, to fight for the right without question or pause, to be willing to march into hell for a heavenly cause. And I know if I'll only be true to this glorious quest, that my heart will lie peaceful and calm when I'm laid to my rest. And the world will be better for this, that one man, scorned and covered with scars, still strove with his last ounce of courage to reach the unreachable stars.
These wonderful people have put this together. Ron, Helen, it's just been really something very, very special for many, many of us. Helen, on behalf of us, a little thank you. When any momentous task like this begins, it involves a lot of people. Some of the people are in the forefront, as these people have given you your performance. There are others who remain in the background. There's another person that I would like to acknowledge tonight, and that's the person that's always there for me, my wife, Donna. Now that this wonderful evening is almost over, if you'd like to join us for a glass of cool punch, right through these doors on the side. Thank you very much, everybody.